As riot police stormed onto the pitch, it seemed like the football game was over. The officers formed a wall of shields separating the players from the referees, as the home crowd laughed at the chaos they had caused. This wasn't just a football match anymore, it had become a battle, and for one team, their survival was on the line. Just 1 year earlier, in 2004, the once mighty Grêmio Football Club had been humiliated when they were relegated from Brazil's top division, Series A, for a team that had proven themselves as the greatest team in the world only 2 decades prior. It was a massive fall from grace. But it was more than just a loss of prestige. For Grêmio, it was a potential death sentence. The club was already teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. They still had some sponsors hanging on from their time in Series A, but if they couldn't get promoted back up in 2005, they'd almost certainly lose them all, along with any potential television revenue and the interest of investors. The 2005 campaign was messy from the start. The coach was replaced just 48 hours before the season's first game. The club had fallen deep into debt, they had lost many of their top players, and with no clear way out of the financial abyss, they had a hard time signing new talent. The management was so desperate for a way out that they started lying to the players they were trying to get on board, telling them that the club was being financially supported by a group of famous but secretive businessmen. It was just enough to convince some players to join. However, in reality, the management was floating the club paycheck to paycheck, often paying players out of their own pockets and with whatever scarce money the club was still bringing in. Despite the turbulence, the decisions made by the management and the performance of their cobbled-together team somehow worked. Against all odds, through the 2005 season, they fought their way to the finals, competing for a chance at promotion. And with the points they'd already gathered, all Grêmio needed was either a draw or a win in this final match to go back up. However, for their rivals, Náutico, only a win would secure promotion, and they were willing to do anything to get it. As Grêmio's bus headed into the stadium on match day, the players could feel the tension in the air. Everywhere they looked, the people lining the streets watched them with a heavy look of disdain. Ever since Náutico were relegated to Series B 11 years earlier in 1994, they'd been thirsting for a chance to claw their way back. And now the men on this bus were the only things standing in their way. The stares unnerved the Grêmio players, and as they got closer to the stadium, the vitriol only continued to build. As the bus approached the entrance, it was swarmed by aggressive Náutico supporters who apparently saw it as their job to intimidate the visiting team. The aggression became so violent and volatile that the police were forced to escort the players into the stadium to prevent something horrific from happening. But when the team finally made it to their changing room and stepped inside, it became clear that this wasn't going to be like any other match they'd experienced during their time in the top division. As they entered, a thick, headache-inducing stench of fresh oil paint filled the air. Desperate for fresh air, they tried to open the door to the pitch, only to discover it had been padlocked and welded shut. Trapped with the deranged fans in the stands blocking every other entrance, Grêmio was forced to sit and fester in the room while awaiting the most important match of the year. They couldn't even make it out to the pitch to warm up or get familiar with the playing surface. It was all part of what Náutico called their home ground advantage. When the time came, Grêmio were escorted into the stadium. They had heard about Náutico's home ground, the Estadio dos Aflitos, and they'd seen photos, but nothing could prepare them for the experience of actually being there. As they walked onto the pitch, they could feel the breath and spit of the Náutico supporters, separated only by a thin wire fence just a few meters from the boundary lines. Náutico almost never lost a home game, and it was clear why. With fans within arm's reach at every corner kick and throw-in, it was a nerve-wracking experience for any away team that had the misfortune of playing there. Still, Grêmio were determined not to let the mind games get in the way of saving their club. The match kicked off, and throughout the entire first half, Grêmio played defensively. All they had to do was hold on for a draw. But as the game progressed and Náutico's desperation grew, it became difficult for Grêmio to control the pace. And towards the end of the first half, their defences began to crack. In a scramble for the ball, Grêmio defender Domingos barely touched the back of a Náutico attacker. The attacker fell and threw his hands in the air, feigning a shocked look to the camera, and the referee awarded Náutico a penalty kick. The Grêmio players were understandably outraged. They pleaded with the referee to change his decision, but he doubled down, giving Domingos a yellow card for his protests. The Náutico player lined up the penalty kick as the stadium shook with the mania of the home crowd. And he hit the post. Grêmio had been temporarily spared. The first half came to an end. Grêmio retreated to their stuffy, toxic changing room, visibly shaken by how close they had come to losing their points advantage. And after a quick pep talk, they returned to the pitch. As they re-entered the field, they could feel the energy in the crowd had become even more unstable. The fans, having refilled their beers and caipirinhas, were clearly preparing for what would become one of the most intense battles in football history. The second half kicked off in much the same way as the first, but as the pressure continued to build and the crowd's hostility towards them continued to unnerve them, the Grêmio players started losing their cool. First, Escalona, Grêmio's left-back, gave away a free kick when he stopped the ball with his hand. Grêmio were annoyed, but the incident seemed minor to them. After all, it was just an accidental touch in the heat of the game. However, the referee saw it differently. To him, it looked intentional, and he wasn't willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. He gave Escalona a red card and he sent him off the field. Grêmio were now down to 10 players in the second half of the most important fight of their lives, and they were understandably furious. The situation became even more desperate 5 minutes later when another Grêmio player was also flagged for a handball, but this time the consequences were even more severe. Another penalty kick for Náutico. This late in the game, a penalty would almost certainly decide the outcome. Even though it seemed clear that this handball was certainly unintentional, the referee had once again made yet another devastating decision against Grêmio. And that's when the team finally reached their breaking point. As the chaos erupted, Patricio bumped the referee and was immediately shown a red card. Grêmio were now down to 9 players. They stupidly started harassing the referee, surrounding him, complaining, and demanding he reverse the decisions. It was a terrible lapse in judgment, and they certainly paid for it. The referee flashed a red card at another Grêmio player, taking their team down to 8. And as the team continued to hassle the referee, the police were called in to prevent the match from devolving into all-out violence. The Náutico fans revelled in the chaos they had enabled. This was exactly what they wanted, to break the team down and destroy them psychologically. Grêmio officials approached the field, and while being boxed out by officers in riot gear, they pleaded with the referee to reconsider, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The chaos eventually settled down over 20 minutes later. The decision stood, and after yet another red card was issued when a Grêmio player threw the ball away in frustration, the team were now down to just 7 players against Náutico's 11. The Grêmio players and managers tried to quit the match in protest, hoping that if they refused to accept the referee's decision, they might get it overruled and force a replay. But after weighing the options, the Grêmio president insisted that they accept the penalty and continue playing. It was an incredibly risky decision. If just one more Grêmio player was sent off, they'd be forced to forfeit. As the rules state, a team can't play with fewer than 7 players. And of course, if Náutico scored the penalty, it would be impossible to fight back with their fractured team. But if they could stop the penalty and hold out for another 10 minutes, they could still end the game in a draw, which would secure their promotion and save the club. The police left the pitch, the stadium fell silent, and tens of thousands held their breath as Náutico's Ademar began his run-up. Grêmio's goalkeeper Galato made his bet on which side to dive to. And he saved it. The Náutico crowd gasped in disbelief. In the streets back home, Grêmio supporters erupted. The game wasn't over yet, but there was hope. And a little bit of hope was all one player in particular needed. 17-year-old Anderson was no longer content with playing a defensive game. When Grêmio got possession of the ball, in a move that took Náutico completely off guard, he launched an aggressive counter-attack. He pushed straight into the Náutico defence and they frantically tried to stop him, rushing back and even fouling him out of desperation. The foul got the Náutico player sent off the field, and now it was 10 versus 7. Grêmio quickly fired off the free kick. Anderson continued his attack, and as he took on the entire defence all by himself, it no longer mattered that Nautico had more players. He shot, he scored. Anderson had scored the first goal of the match, finally giving Grêmio the breathing room they so desperately needed. Now, Nautico would need 2 goals in only a few minutes to steal the promotion. Their fans were furious, throwing rubbish onto their own field, causing the game to drag out even longer as officials worked to clear it. In the stands, a wave of Nautico supporters began rushing for the exits. And after what felt like a battle with no end, the referee blew the final whistle. Grêmio had done it. They'd secured a promotion back into Series A, yes, but more so, they had resurrected the club from almost certain death. In the months that followed, money and support flooded into Grêmio in the form of sponsorships, investment, and even book and movie deals. And to this day, they remain in Brazil's first division. As for Nautico, they also eventually earned their own promotion the following year in 2006. But after years of bouncing back and forth between the two divisions, they've since been relegated to Series C.